Take a slow breath and imagine the world as it once was, in a time when the memories of an earlier era still lingered gently in the air. Cities were rebuilding themselves. Families were rediscovering ordinary routines, and people everywhere were trying to return to quiet, peaceful days. Yet beneath that calm surface, there was a faint sense of unease, subtle, almost like a distant echo, reminding everyone that the world was changing in ways they could not fully understand. Across continents, life moved at a steady pace. Streets were filled with the sound of footsteps heading to work, radios humming softly in living rooms, and trains gliding along tracks carrying hopes for a better future. The evenings were filled with warm conversations, laughter at dining tables, and dreams whispered as the night settled in. But within that everyday comfort, something delicate was shifting. The world felt like it was standing at the edge of something new, something much bigger than anyone could truly imagine. Many nations were still healing from a challenging period not too far behind them. People hoped that the lessons from that time would guide the world toward understanding and unity. Leaders gathered to talk, to plan, and to encourage cooperation. Their voices carried hope, yet their expressions sometimes showed the quiet weight of responsibility. They sensed that keeping harmony required more than agreements. It required trust, patience, and the willingness to listen. In small towns and large cities, newspapers spoke about changes happening far away. Social tensions, political transitions, and moments of uncertainty that seemed harmless at first glance. Most people read the headlines with mild curiosity, believing that these shifts were distant stories with little connection to their daily lives. Yet, piece by piece, the global mood subtly transformed, as if the world were slowly inhaling before a long, uncertain sigh. For families, life continued with gentle rhythm. Parents tucked their children into bed, telling stories of past adventures and future possibilities. Farmers tended their fields with quiet dedication, watching the seasons move with comforting predictability. Travelers crossed borders with wonder in their eyes, marveling at new landscapes and cultures. Even as clouds of uncertainty gathered far beyond the horizon, the human spirit remained soft, resilient, and hopeful. But the world was not static. It was alive, breathing, shifting, stretching. In the distance, relationships between nations grew delicate. Some felt misunderstood. Others felt unheard. A subtle imbalance began to form, creating ripples that reached far across oceans and mountains. These ripples were gentle at first, almost invisible, like faint tremors in the heart of the world. Still, people carried on with an unspoken belief that life would always find its way back to peace. And in many homes, there was a quiet confidence that challenges could be solved with conversation and cooperation. The nights were filled with the same starry skies, and the mornings arrived with familiar sunlight warming the earth. Yet, even as the world hoped, it stood unknowingly at the threshold of one of the most transformative periods in human history. Not because of one moment, but because of many delicate threads weaving together. Threads made of ambition, uncertainty, dreams, fears, progress, and misunderstanding. Together, they would stretch the world in ways no one had ever seen before. And so, in this gentle moment, in this stillness before a turning point, the world rested at the edge of a journey that would reshape generations, redefine societies, and leave lessons that would echo softly through time. As the world moved through the early decades of the century, several nations began to experience deep internal changes. Streets that once felt predictable now carried a different kind of energy, quieter, more focused, shaped by people searching for direction in uncertain times. Economic difficulties, social tension, and shifting values encouraged new voices to rise, offering promises of stability, renewal, and national pride. In some countries, leaders emerged with strong, confident tones that resonated with citizens who felt left behind by the rapid pace of change. Their speeches were filled with determination and reassurance, reminding people of brighter days they hoped to recapture. Crowds listened closely, not out of fear, but out of longing for clarity, identity, and a sense of belonging in a world that felt increasingly unfamiliar. Industries were transforming as well. Factories buzzed with new ambitions, cities expanded, and technological advancement accelerated. Many saw these developments as signs of progress, while others felt overwhelmed, unsure whether these changes would benefit their families. This mixture of hope and uncertainty created an atmosphere that allowed strong leadership to take root. Meanwhile, nations observed one another carefully. Each one felt the pressure to redefine its place in the world. Some believed they needed more influence to protect their people. Others felt their traditions were being overshadowed by the pace of global modernization. These quiet anxieties grew slowly, shaping decisions behind closed doors. Everyday citizens sensed these shifts even if they couldn't describe them. They heard new slogans in public squares, saw new symbols and posters, and noticed that conversations about national direction became more intense, more emotional. The world wasn't just moving forward, it was preparing to reshape itself. These rising powers didn't grow from aggression, but from a collective search for identity in a rapidly changing era. A search that, unknowingly, would contribute to the momentum pushing the world toward a larger, more complex chapter in its shared story. During this period of shifting ambitions, the world still tried to hold on to a sense of calm. International gatherings were organized with hopeful intentions, bringing leaders to the same tables to discuss cooperation and long-term stability. They exchanged careful smiles, signed agreements, and expressed a shared desire to prevent misunderstandings from growing. Yet even with these efforts, the peace that existed felt delicate, like a glass surface that could tremble from the smallest vibration. Many nations carried emotional memories of earlier hardship, and those memories influenced how they viewed each other. Some were cautious, others defensive, and many simply wished that everyone would stay committed to harmony. Communities around the globe sensed this fragile balance. Newspapers spoke of negotiations, summits, and cautious optimism. People read these updates during breakfast or heard them through quiet radio broadcasts, hoping that the world's leaders would continue to guide the era toward stability. Still, behind their hope rested a quiet awareness that trust among nations was not as strong as it once seemed. Trade routes, cultural exchanges, and travel continued, but with an undercurrent of hesitation. Countries watched one another closely, measuring intentions, interpreting statements, and wondering if promises made today would still hold tomorrow. The world wanted peace, but peace required understanding, and understanding was becoming harder to maintain. And so, even though daily life moved gently forward, the global community lived under a subtle tension. A sense that calm existed not because everything was settled, but because everyone was trying very hard to keep it that way. In the heart of Europe, life seemed to move at its usual pace. Markets buzzed softly, trains rolled through vast countrysides, and families filled their evenings with simple routines. Yet beneath this everyday calm, a quiet tension slowly grew. It wasn't loud or sudden. It appeared in the form of uneasy conversations, shifting policies, and small disagreements that carried more weight than people first realized. Different nations in the region faced their own internal struggles. Some were dealing with economic hardships that left citizens feeling uncertain about tomorrow. Others carried lingering frustration from past arrangements they believed had limited their growth. Political leaders in these places sensed the mood of their people and began speaking with sharper emphasis, promising solutions, renewal, and recognition on the world stage. Because of this, Europe became a place where emotions mixed. Pride, disappointment, hope, and restlessness blended into a complex atmosphere. Countries tried to negotiate new terms with one another, yet each one felt that its concerns were the most urgent. Meetings were held across capitals. Diplomats traveled back and forth with folders full of proposals. Though these gatherings aimed to bring clarity, each discussion seemed to reveal new misunderstandings rather than resolve them. Meanwhile, the public observed these developments through newspapers and radio broadcasts. Families sat together in their living rooms listening to updates about political disagreements, leadership changes, and unexpected announcements. Some households felt reassured that strong decisions were being made. Others felt uneasy, as if too many things were shifting too quickly. People wanted stability, but stability felt harder to maintain than before. In coastal towns, industrial centers, and rural villages, the same whispered worry appeared. Why did everything feel so uncertain? The landscapes remained beautiful. The seasons continued as they always had, but the emotional tone of Europe had clearly changed. Every nation watched its neighbors more carefully. Every leader chose words with increasing caution. There is a sense that one wrong step, one emotional decision, or one failure to compromise could push the region into a deeper period of strain. The spark that emerged during this time was not a single event, but rather the accumulation of many small tensions, each one subtle, but together powerful enough to alter the course of the continent. As misunderstandings grew, people began sensing that they were living in a moment that would shape their future, even if they couldn't yet define how. This feeling lingered in cafes, in classrooms, and in offices, a soft awareness that Europe was approaching a turning point. Still, hope remained intertwined with worry. Many individuals believed that diplomacy would prevail, that leaders would find common ground, that a shared desire for harmony would guide the way forward. Yet others felt that too many promises had been stretched, too many grievances had gone unheard, and too much trust had quietly faded. This emotional divide between hope and uncertainty became the silent spark of a larger transformation. It traveled across borders not as a sound, but as a feeling carried in the expressions of workers, the speeches of officials, and the headlines of newspapers. And though Europe's cities continued to glow softly against the night sky, the world around them held its breath, sensing that the next chapter was already forming in the shadows of these subtle, accumulating strains. Across many regions of the world, leaders began imagining futures that stretched far beyond their current borders. Visions filled with confidence, determination, and the belief that their nations were meant to achieve more. These ambitions did not appear suddenly. They grew slowly, shaped by years of economic pressure, social change, and the desire to secure a stable place in a world that felt increasingly unpredictable. Some countries looked outward, believing that expanding their influence would bring prosperity and safety to their people. They spoke of renewed strength, restored dignity, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. Citizens listened with mixed emotions. Many welcomed these visions, hoping they would lead to opportunity and recognition. Others felt uneasy, sensing that such aspirations could create tension with neighboring nations who held dreams of their own. Industries became central to these national goals. Governments encouraged production, innovation, and infrastructure development. New factories rose alongside old ones. Trains carried important materials across long routes, and cities expanded as workers moved to areas where jobs were promised. To some, this progress felt inspiring, evidence that their nations were stepping confidently into the modern era. But to others, it felt like a sign that the world was becoming more competitive, more demanding, and more uncertain. Diplomats noticed these changes as well. International conversations grew more delicate, filled with polite phrases that carried deeper meanings beneath the surface. Countries that once cooperated easily now approached discussions with caution, measuring every word. Everyone wanted growth, but few were certain how to achieve it without affecting the aspirations of others. This created an invisible tension, soft, quiet, but unmistakable. communities sensed the shift in their daily routines. Posters appeared promoting national goals. Newspapers highlighted ambitious projects, and speeches filled with determination. Radio broadcasts sounded more focused, more serious, as if each message carried an unspoken reminder that the world was entering a different kind of era. Even children noticed how adults spoke more carefully at dinner tables, aware that something in the global atmosphere had changed. And yet, despite the growing ambitions, there remained a shared human desire for stability. People wanted safety for their families, steady income, and a sense of direction. They hoped their leaders' visions would lead to a peaceful kind of progress, one shaped by cooperation rather than strain. But the world was complex, and the overlapping dreams of powerful nations created a maze of interests that was difficult to navigate. These expanding ambitions formed one of the early threads of a much larger transformation. Threads woven not from conflict, but from hope, pride, anxiety, and the universal longing for a better future. Each nation, believing it was acting for the good of its people, began taking steps that quietly nudged the world toward a global shift that few could fully predict. And so, even as cities thrived and industries grew, the world moved deeper into a period where dreams and uncertainties intertwined, shaping a path that would soon lead humanity into a defining chapter of its collective story. As tensions slowly rose across continents, the world reached a moment when conversations, agreements, and careful diplomacy could no longer hold everything together. The shift did not arrive with noise or spectacle. It came quietly, almost unexpectedly, like a gentle crack appearing in something once thought unbreakable. People sensed it before they fully understood it. A subtle awareness that the era of uncertainty had crossed into something deeper. In many regions, communities awoke to news that distant disagreements had grown more serious. Radio broadcasters spoke with calm, measured voices, explaining that various nations were now taking firm positions to protect their interests. These announcements carried a tone of gravity, yet also restraint, as if everyone involved hoped that the situation could still be guided back toward stability. But for ordinary citizens, the meaning was clear. The world was entering a new chapter, one shaped by large-scale tension spreading across borders. Families gathered around kitchen tables, quietly discussing what these developments might mean for their daily lives. Parents tried to reassure their children, saying that leaders around the world were working hard to find solutions. Shopkeepers listened to the latest updates while organizing their shelves, wondering how long routines would remain unchanged. Farmers paused in their fields, noticing how even the wind felt different, as if the land itself was reacting to the distant unrest. Governments responded by reorganizing resources, strengthening communication networks, and preparing for long periods of uncertainty. Train stations grew busier as supplies were moved with greater urgency. Factories adjusted their schedules, focusing on producing materials considered essential for national readiness. Offices filled with planners, analysts, and coordinators, all working to prepare their societies for an extended period of strain. Even though these changes were logistical in nature, they reshaped the rhythm of everyday life in a profound way. International relations became more complicated. Messages between nations grew formal, cautious, and emotionally charged. Every decision, no matter how small, carried symbolic weight. Leaders tried to maintain respectful dialogue, but mutual concerns and differing ambitions made it difficult to find common ground. Everyone hoped tensions would ease, yet each passing day seemed to deepen the sense that the world was moving into a phase that could not be easily undone. Amid all this uncertainty, ordinary people held onto whatever normalcy they could. They continued to open their shops each morning, walk through familiar streets, and share gentle conversations with neighbors. There was a quiet collective effort to preserve calm, to remind one another that the human spirit remains steady even when the world becomes unpredictable. This determination to stay grounded, reflected in simple acts like brewing tea, reading evening newspapers, or humming familiar tunes, became a source of comfort during rapidly changing times. Still, beneath the surface, everyone understood the significance of this shift. What had begun as scattered tensions across Europe and beyond had now evolved into a global situation that touched nearly every nation. The beginning of this larger movement was not defined by loud events, but by the emotional weight carried in the hearts of millions. Feelings of uncertainty, curiosity, hope, and quiet resilience. And so, with the world gently stepping into a period of unprecedented strain, humanity found itself facing a challenge unlike any before. A challenge not defined by individual moments, but by the collective emotions, decisions, and hopes of people everywhere, each one living through a time that would soon reshape the history of the entire planet. As the world stepped deeper into this period of rising tension, something subtle yet unmistakable began to unfold. The situation was no longer limited to one region. Quietly, gradually, the atmosphere of uncertainty expanded across continents, touching places that had once felt distant from Europe's concerns. It wasn't a sudden shift. It was more like a slow-moving tide, reaching new shores with deliberate, steady rhythm. In Asia, people noticed changes in diplomatic tone and national priorities. Governments adjusted their policies, strengthened communications, and made long-term plans shaped by concerns about regional stability. Markets remained open, ports continued their routines, but beneath the surface lay an unspoken awareness that the balance of the region was shifting. Traders, teachers, and travelers felt it in the way conversations became more cautious, more thoughtful, as if everyone sensed that the world's center of gravity had subtly moved. Across Africa, communities observed international developments with a mixture of curiosity and concern. News reached them through coastal harbors, traveling merchants, and radio reports that echoed softly through evening air. Territories administered by distant nations began experiencing administrative adjustments, resource reallocation, and renewed strategic importance. Local populations felt these shifts as quiet disruptions to familiar rhythms, small but meaningful signs that global changes were beginning to influence their everyday lives. In the vast landscapes of Middle East, long-established routes continued to carry caravans, traders, and cultural exchanges. Yet even here, the global situation created a new sense of significance around the region's resources and geographic position. Officials, scholars, and merchants found themselves discussing matters that reached far beyond their own borders, recognizing that they were becoming part of a larger global web shaped by decisions made oceans away. Further south, the nations of the Americas observed these developments with growing attention. While life in many cities still moved with its usual liveliness, street markets, farms, ships, and factories operating as always, the news coming from across the Atlantic resonated deeply. Leaders debated how their countries should respond to the spreading tension. Citizens discussed the matter with quiet uncertainty during evenings on porches, in cafes, or on long walks home. Even though oceans separated them from Europe and Asia, they could feel the world's mood changing. Oceania, with its islands scattered across peaceful waters, also became more attentive to international developments. Coastal communities that relied on shipping and trade watched as foreign vessels passed with a different sense of purpose. Small towns, though far from the centers of diplomacy, felt the faint ripple of global concern in the way governments prepared new policies, adjusted priorities, and emphasized readiness in calm but deliberate announcements. As the situation grew more interconnected, communication networks became busier than ever. Telegraph lines buzzed with coded messages, ships carried diplomatic notes across long distances, and ambassadors traveled urgently between capitals. Every nation, large or small, now found itself drawn into the global conversation, aware that its choices could influence or be influenced by events happening far beyond its immediate surroundings. For everyday people, the spreading tension created an emotional landscape filled with uncertainty but also solidarity. Communities listened together to news broadcasts, helping one another interpret unfamiliar terms. Families made practical adjustments to their routines, preparing for possible shortages or changes in employment. Teachers reassured students, neighbors supported neighbors, and many individuals leaned into the comforting routines that gave structure to daily life. What made this moment remarkable was not the scale of the tension itself, but the way it intertwined humanity across continents. For the first time in history, nearly every corner of the world felt connected through shared apprehension, shared curiosity, and shared hope that the situation might eventually calm. The spreading strain revealed how deeply interwoven nations had become, and how actions in one part of the world could echo softly, yet powerfully, across the entire globe. And so, the world entered a truly global chapter, one in which continents were no longer isolated observers, but participants in a collective journey that would shape the future of humanity. Across the wide expanse of the Pacific, a region known for its calm horizons and vast stretches of open water, a quiet shift in atmosphere began to take place. Islands that once felt like peaceful stepping stones across the ocean suddenly found themselves at the center of international attention. Nations with interests in the Pacific started to observe one another more carefully, each one sensing that the region was becoming increasingly important to the world's unfolding story. In ports across East and Southeast Asia, ships moved in and out with a different rhythm. Dock workers noticed new types of cargo, officials monitored arrivals with sharper awareness, and coastal residents observed unfamiliar flags drifting into view. Though life continued as usual, fishermen setting out before sunrise, markets buzzing with early morning chatter, there was an underlying sense that the familiar patterns were slowly changing. Diplomatic communication grew more frequent. Ambassadors traveled between capitals across Asia and the Pacific, carrying messages that expressed both caution and intent. The tone of these exchanges, while polite, carried a firmness that hinted at deeper concerns: national pride, strategic interests, and the need to secure resources essential for growth. Governments quietly adjusted policies, reorganized administrative systems, and increased attention on maritime routes that connected their lands to the rest of the world. In Japan, the conversations among leaders and citizens reflected the country's growing transformation, industrial expansion, economic ambition, and a desire to be seen as a respected force in the international arena. Factories hummed with activity, cities modernized at impressive speed, and the atmosphere was filled with both confidence and pressure. People wanted stability and opportunity, yet they also sensed that the world was becoming more competitive and more demanding. China, meanwhile, faced its own internal challenges. The nation was in a period of transition, with societal shifts influencing everything from regional governance to cultural identity. Communities across its vast landscape felt the emotional weight of uncertainty, hoping for steadier times, while adjusting to the reality that the Pacific's rising tension was reaching them as well. Foreign powers maintained strong interests in the area, which added layers of complexity to China's evolving future. The islands of the Pacific, Hawaii, Guam, the Philippines, and countless others, became strategic points watched closely by distant capitals. Their quiet beaches, gentle winds, and tight-knit communities concealed their growing geopolitical importance. Local residents continued their routines, fishing, weaving, farming, and gathering with family. Yet they noticed more frequent foreign presence, more administrative announcements, and more conversations about global developments. Australia and New Zealand also felt the quiet shift. Their distance from Europe had once made the Pacific feel like a protective barrier, but now that same ocean seemed to connect them directly to the rising tensions. Leaders debated long-term plans, strengthened alliances, and encouraged citizens to stay informed about global changes. Even though daily life remained peaceful, children attending school, trains crossing wide plains, families enjoying calm evenings, everyone sensed that the world was paying closer attention to their region than ever before. Across the United States, policymakers monitored the Pacific with increasing seriousness. The Western Coast buzzed with activity as ports grew busier, businesses expanded their overseas connections, and discussions about the country's role in the Pacific became part of national dialogue. Citizens living near the ocean felt a subtle change in the atmosphere. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet understanding that the Pacific was becoming a central stage in the global picture. Throughout all these regions, the emotional tone was a mixture of hope, ambition, uncertainty, and responsibility. People wanted progress, but they also wanted assurance that their families would remain safe and their communities stable. They watched the Pacific not as a distant expanse of water, but as a space that was gradually becoming the heart of international focus. The Pacific, once seen mainly as a vast and tranquil distance between continents, was now becoming an arena of shifting intentions, careful diplomacy, and expanding interests. No one knew exactly how the unfolding story would develop, but everyone could feel that the region's importance was growing. With each wave, each diplomatic message, and each new ripple in global relations. There was a time when the world seemed to stand at a quiet crossroads, a moment when societies everywhere were feeling the weight of change. People lived between hope and uncertainty, trying to understand why everything around them shifted so quickly. In the middle of this atmosphere, a story emerged, born from curiosity, from a desire to understand how small, scattered moments across different places could somehow connect and form a picture greater than anyone expected. The story began with a simple journey. Someone choosing to trace old footsteps hidden in notes, photographs, voice recordings, and memories passed down through generations. He wasn't a well-known expert, nor a historical figure. He was simply a person moved by a deep sense of wonder, someone who believed that every fragment of information mattered, even when it looked ordinary. As his journey unfolded, he arrived at a location often mentioned by people of earlier eras, a place that had once drawn the attention of the world. Not because of dramatic scenes, but because it carried an atmosphere that lingered long after time moved on. It was a place that seemed to hold the past, the present, and the future together in a single breath. Standing there, he felt the wind brush through him, carrying the scent of old leaves and muted memories. It was as if the air itself whispered the mood of a bygone era. People once crossed that same place with mixed emotions, some with confidence, some with hope, and others simply trying to understand the changes unfolding around them. The space had quietly witnessed heavy footsteps, subtle conversations, and thoughtful gazes filled with unspoken feelings. During his exploration, he came across records about a figure who played an important role in those earlier days, a leader known not for perfection, but for sincerity. The writings did not portray anything extreme. Instead, they revealed a human being navigating a challenging period with calm determination, searching for clarity in an age filled with tension. Many people from that time looked to him not because he had all the answers, but because he appeared to carry the same worries they did, and yet still found the strength to keep moving forward. As the traveler continued reading, he sensed the atmosphere of a world that was trying to rebuild itself, piece by piece. People held on to hope even when they didn't fully understand what the next day would bring. They listened to speeches, watched broadcasts, and gathered in small groups to discuss the state of their times. There was a shared understanding that the world was entering a new chapter, one that demanded patience, empathy, and thoughtful guidance. Slowly, the traveler realized that the story he was uncovering was not just about a location or a public figure. It was about the emotional landscape of an entire era, about individuals learning to navigate uncertainty, about communities trying to remain connected in a world undergoing profound transformation, and about a leader who, despite the weight on his shoulders, continued to seek the path that could bring people closer to stability and reassurance. By the time he closed the final notebook, the traveler understood that history is not only shaped by grand events. It also grows from quiet decisions, private worries, shared hopes, and a simple human desire to find meaning in complicated times. He walked away from that place, carrying not just information, but a renewed appreciation for the people who lived before him. People who faced their own moments of tension with courage, softness, and hope. And somewhere in that understanding, he discovered what he had been searching for all along. Not a mystery, but a reminder that every era, no matter how difficult, is carried forward by the hearts of those who live through it. As the traveler continued his quiet exploration, he noticed a recurring theme woven through every journal entry, letter, and old newspaper he found. The world had not only been experiencing tension, it had been learning how to adapt. Nations, communities, and individuals were discovering new ways to cope with uncertainty, each in their own gentle rhythm. And in this slow adjustment, the traveler found a story both subtle and profound. There were notes describing families who gathered around dim radios in the evenings, listening to voices that brought news from faraway places. Although the tone of those broadcasts sometimes carried a hint of unease, households treated them as part of their nightly routine. People prepared tea, turned down their lights, and sat together quietly, absorbing every word with hope that tomorrow would bring clearer skies. Even in uneasy times, they created moments of calm, moments that allowed them to breathe, hope, and feel connected to one another. The traveler also discovered accounts from merchants, teachers, musicians, and workers who describe how society continued moving gently and persistently. Markets adjusted their schedules, schools adapted their lessons, and musicians performed in small gatherings, offering melodies that helped lift the weight of the era. People found comfort in these simple routines, as if maintaining familiar rhythms could guide them through unfamiliar days. One record told of scientists and thinkers who met in crowded rooms filled with chalkboards and stacks of papers. They discussed ideas with quiet urgency, trying to make sense of the fast-changing world. The writings didn't focus on dramatic decisions. Instead, they revealed thoughtful discussions, shared curiosity, and a collective desire to understand what the future might demand. Every discovery, no matter how small, felt like a step towards stability. There were also gentle reflections from travelers, ordinary people who crossed borders not to witness turmoil, but to observe how others lived during this time. They described streets filled with soft conversations, shops that opened with reassuring consistency, and communities that welcomed strangers with warm smiles. These travelers realized that despite the atmosphere of global tension, humanity's instinct to care for one another remained strong. The traveler reading these accounts felt a sense of quiet admiration. The world, despite facing immense pressure, displayed remarkable resilience. It was not resilience defined by grand gestures or heroic scenes, but by everyday decisions to wake up, to work, to listen, to comfort, to keep going. These small acts, repeated millions of times across different countries, formed a silent network of strength. Another set of journals described gatherings of diplomats and advisors who spent long nights in thoughtful conversation. They sat around polished tables, papers scattered before them, trying to guide their nations toward understanding. Sometimes their discussions stretched into the early hours of the morning, accompanied only by the soft scratch of pen on paper and the quiet hum of distant city life. Their work was slow, often frustrating, but grounded in the hope that cooperation could still shape the future. Reading all of this, the traveler began to understand something important. Even in an era filled with uncertainty, humanity did not stop seeking harmony. People continued to nurture kindness, preserve traditions, share stories, and build bridges, sometimes literally, sometimes emotionally. They held on to what mattered most: family, culture, community, and the belief that tomorrow could still be shaped with care. As the sun dipped below the horizon of the place he visited, casting long shadows across the landscape, the traveler closed the final booklet from that day. A calm realization settled in his heart. The world of that era had been undeniably tense. It was also filled with quiet courage. Not the kind that comes from dramatic actions, but the kind found in ordinary people choosing, again and again, to keep their humanity intact. And so he walked slowly back to his lodging, accompanied by the soft glow of evening lights and the gentle hum of a world that never stopped striving to adapt, even in its most uncertain moments. And so, after countless pages, distant memories, faded letters, and quiet testimonies, the traveler finally reached the final chapter. It was unlike the others. There were no documents left to examine, no journals waiting to be unfolded, no radio transcripts resting in careful stacks. Instead, the archivist handed him a single envelope, light as a whisper, sealed with a simple ribbon. "This," she said softly, "is the part everyone forgets to look for." Inside was not a report or a timeline, but a short reflection written many years after the world had moved beyond its turbulent era. It spoke with a calmness that only time could create, describing how humanity eventually learned to breathe again, to rebuild its sense of trust, and to step forward with newfound understanding. It didn't praise or criticize anyone. It simply acknowledged the quiet strength that had carried people through one of history's most complex chapters. The letter explained that the true story of the era was not found in dramatic moments, but in the gentle persistence of ordinary individuals. Workers who kept essential routes open, families who preserved hope during uncertain nights, leaders who sought understanding despite pressure, and communities who refused to lose their sense of connection. Humanity, the writer said, had shown an extraordinary ability to adapt, to listen, and to begin again. As the traveler read, a soft warmth moved through him. He could almost feel the presence of the people who had lived during that time. Their quiet footsteps, their cautious conversations, their moments of doubt, and their flickers of hope. He imagined the streets gradually brightening, the cities slowly finding their rhythm, and the world exhaling after holding its breath for far too long. The final lines of the letter were simple, yet deeply moving. In the end, the world learned that even the greatest challenges cannot erase the kindness we keep in our hearts. History remembers what happened. We remember how we lived through it. The traveler folded the letter gently, feeling as if he had been entrusted with something precious. When he stepped outside the archive for the last time, the evening air greeted him with a soft breeze, carrying the scent of quiet streets and distant lanterns. The sky above was painted in calming shades of blue and gold, as if the world itself wanted to tell him that everything, every era, every journey, every struggle, eventually finds its place. He walked slowly, letting the silence settle around him. Nothing felt heavy anymore. The stories he had uncovered were no longer fragments of uncertainty, but reminders of resilience. The people of that era had faced emotional tides deeper than they could express, yet they continued forward with grace. Their actions, their hopes, their small moments of courage had shaped the world he now walked through. When he reached a gentle rise overlooking the town, he paused. Lights flickered in windows below. Somewhere, a train hummed in the distance. A child laughed near a doorstep. Life, quiet, steady, familiar, moved on. And with a soft breath, the traveler understood the true ending. The greatest story of that era was not about the hardships themselves, but about humanity's ability to outgrow them, to heal, to learn, to build a future gentler than the past. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the calm settle deep within him. Then, with a peaceful heart, he stepped into the night, carrying with him not just the lessons of history, but the quiet truth that even the largest chapters eventually give way to new beginnings.